Good afternoon. Quite impressive. I feel like a real professor now. Okay, so welcome. So indeed, thank you for inviting us to present us the Airbus consortium solution for BroadWay. And within this presentation, we will give you a glimpse on the results so far, because the project is still ongoing, obviously. First, it's important to explain to you why BroadWay and BroadNet is important and why it matters. So that's what I'm going to start about. So then as a second point, we will explain you how we translate it, because PSCE and community has done a journey in creating a broad map, translated this into use cases to key and we have translated this to key requirements and solution characteristics. It was a difficult task, as you know, but we managed together with some other parties, of course. And then, of course, it's important also to see how we have built a solution. It's called the Airbus consortium, but we are not alone in the consortium. Of course, we have collected a number of experts to help us. And then last, but for sure not least, or previous, we have the key learnings that we believe that needs to be addressed for sure in BroadNet, and the challenges we have met in BroadWay project. What's next is already explained by a couple of people, but we will give you a short view on that. So why does BroadWay, BroadNet matter? Well, I think there are a lot of reasons, and I heard a lot of speeches saying or speaking about cross-border communication. So I think this is a very key point why BroadWay, BroadNet is important. Today, public safety workers have tools, but these are heavily voice-centric, obviously. There is only limited data, and for sure there is no multimedia involved. Also important is that although there are some hacks, I call them, to collaborate across borders, because the current legacy systems, as we know, Tetrapol, are quite nation border limited. There are some exceptions in Scandinavia where there is ISI implemented, but those are seldom. Other countries are rather isolated and cannot easily cooperate together. So this is for sure a very important topic that is addressed within the BroadWay project. So all cross-border communication, I saw very often that connectivity is needed, while BroadWay, BroadNet is the answer to this. And of course, it's important to give the newest and greatest tools to our public safety workers, first responders, of course. Last but not least, it's important, I think the geopolitical situation proves that it's important that we as Europe create this own ecosystem and take the future of our own security system. We have done so for GSM. Let's do this for public safety communication systems as well. Okay. So from challenge to solution. So the RFQ we received at phase 1 was a challenging one, let's say. It was kind of constructed around a number of use cases and a number of challenges. And from there, we basically derived, yes, Airbus consortium, a number of key challenges that needs to be addressed in the solution. So at the left side, you can see the challenges or the characteristics that are important. And at the right side, you can see how we are addressing them in our solution. In what follows, you will see from an architectural point of view how we address this and have built this actually, not just designed. So interoperability, an important one. Interoperability has multiple aspects actually. I think David mentioned it. Every European country is basically at a different speed. Some will have spectrum, some won't. Some will have an MVNO architecture, some will have a dedicated network designed, some will just have to rely on the existing networks. So that's the first aspect in interoperability that needs to be taken into account. The solution we design needs to be able to cope with all of these cases. So it needs to be completely agnostic on what is laying below. That's one aspect of interoperability. A second one is that it needs to be able to, for group calls, or group communication, let's call it, to be able to, obviously, to discuss between different organizations, within nations, within different countries even. That is not always the case today, or very, very difficult to realize. And obviously, now we kind of have fixed fleet mappings implemented in every country. It needs to be very flexible to set up ad hoc group communications and to do this. So these are a number of aspects that need to be addressed under the umbrella of interoperability. Roaming. We all know roaming. Everybody has a mobile phone in its pocket and can make phone calls. This is currently not the case for the PPDR users if they are using the legacy systems. So by bringing these technologies that we all know to the public safety world, they will be able to do this. But public safety would not be public safety if there is not an additional requirement on top of this. We all know the behavior when you're at the border, that you will have to wait a couple of minutes before you get connection to another network. For public safety, this is obviously not acceptable. So we need to find a solution to cope with this. Also, it's important, obviously, that public safety users come in action when there's a crisis, that they always have privileged access. So quality of service needs to be implemented and needs to be available wherever you are. Last but not least, it is important because we are Europe, but we are still nations on our own and organizations want to keep the full control and security of all their own users. So in interoperability, when communicating abroad, should not impact control nor security. So from these challenges or characteristics, we translate this to characteristics or core principles as we have designed our solution. So from start, it was very clear for us that we needed to take use of real production networks. So we are not using test setups in laboratories or something. Now we are using the networks as they are. So we wanted to learn from this what is possible and what kind of barriers are we bumping into. So that's why we took the principle of using real production networks. It's also important that we used the SpiceNet word has been used here a couple of times, but it's a hub-based mobile broadband network, of course, to ensure that communications or ad hoc communications can be set up very easily, fast and efficient way, keeping in mind security principles. Second to that, the security principle is that always an end user will always have its communication based on its home server or its home mission critical service provider. So instead of, so in case there is a need for pan-European communication between organizations from different countries, one approach could be that you kind of create one pan-European group with all individual members. But this would be in conflict with control and security. So that's why we took the principle of the group of groups, and that is realized in the hub architecture, where if Fire Brigade of Slovenia needs to communicate with the police of Latvia, well, those two groups, rather than combining the individual members of those groups, we will combine the groups together, keeping in mind that control remains at the home country and security is guaranteed. And the last principle is that there are also organizations within Europe that have no network at all. So thinking about Frontex, they have no network at all. Also, these organizations might want to have their own service, but need to be able to rely on the service as well. So that's why we have put together at the hub components and a European mission critical service. So these are the principles. How does this translate now in an architecture? And here you see directly also the different partners we have collected. The partners have changed a bit along the project. It is a project of 2 to 3 years that we have done. So it was also in that respect a very interesting journey for us. But here you can see how it is built. So it's not so complicated if I explain to you. So in the middle you have the so-called hub, which has different layers. So I talked to you about the pan-European MCS hub. Well, that's the top layer. So this entity or logical function will ensure that if groups from one country or from one organization needs to communicate with organization of another country, that these are combined. So this is realized in the pan-European hub, which is supplied by one of our technology partners, Streamwide. Underneath that, you have the European organization MCS. So this organization or this platform is basically ensuring that the people that want to have an MCS service but have no access whatsoever to a network, that they also can rely and have control and secure in a secured way their own infrastructure. So that's realized with the European organization MCS, also provided by Streamwide. So these are the communication platforms. And then the layer below, what you see there, is basically provided by our partner BICS, so part of the Proximus group, which basically also most probably ensures that you are able to communicate. So they are basically doing the same in this setup, so they can rely on a portfolio of hundreds of roaming agreements to ensure that everybody can communicate wherever he goes in an instant way. So they have this instant roaming solution. We believe that this is a very important component in the whole solution because, well, in case new PPDR or some PPDR operators would like to establish this roaming capability, we believe it's not realistic that they will start negotiating with all operators all over the world, basically, to get to roaming agreements. With the service provided by BICS, you have basically instantly access to these hundreds of roaming agreements. At the left, at the right side, you see two national MCS servers provided by ourselves. So these will ensure that organizations, well, here it's located in Belgium, that Belgian organizations are hosted on that server and communicate. So this is the communication platform for them. At the other side, you have another Airbus platform, which is basically the communication platform for a special network case where we simulate together with our Airbus partners at Toulouse. So it's a private LTE network deployed at our factories in Toulouse. So the communication part is ensured by this platform. So, and then at the left side here, you see that we have brought on board 3 mobile broadband networks from Slovenia, Netherlands, and Latvia. So these 3 networks are implementing the quality of service mechanisms to ensure that when a public safety user needs a communication line, that he will get its communication line with priority above the regular users. And then the lowest layer obviously is the terminal part, but there's an interesting piece of software also provided by BICS on the SIM cards to ensure that switching from network to network goes very fast within 5 seconds and not minutes. So that's an important thing. Okay. E-learnings, I think that's important to understand. So far, the key learnings are mainly technical. So the technical, its current phases has been mainly technical oriented. But by using real production networks, we have basically unlocked a lot of learnings that when you don't try it, you will not detect it. So here we experienced some challenges that we have overcome a certain way, or that at least needs to be overcome for what follows in BroadNet. And the first one is with regards to a harmonized behavior of the so-called privileged access. So to ensure that when you go to Belgium, you have priority one with your SIM card, but if you go to France, Germany, or whatever, that you have basically the same behavior. Well, this is not always the case when it's not carefully regulated. So that's basically our biggest learning. One of the learnings is that by doing it, we have detected some technical issues that needs to be solved in the standards. So that's clear, that will be covered. But that's not the biggest hurdle. We believe that the biggest hurdle is that there need to be commercial and regulatory motivators for the different operators in the different countries to ensure a harmonized behavior. And we believe that this can only be realized at the European level. So it's an important lesson, we believe. So that's behavior within a country. Also, when you're moving from country to country, to ensure that these seamless operation targets to have a connection reestablishment within seconds, it's also a big challenge, of course. And the current technology, 2G, 3G, to a certain extent even 4G, those technologies, they are basically made to so that an operator, operator X, keeps you as long as possible on its own network. For public safety, and when you're moving from country to country, that's not the desired behavior, of course. So all those technologies are basically designed to feed this commercial need from the mobile operators. So there's a technical challenge and some standardization to be done at 3GPP or 5GPP or 6GPP, whatever it may be called, to ensure that this operational targets are met. Potential way might be an accelerated introduction of voice over LTE VoLTE, and because that's not the case, at least not in Europe yet, to ensure that VoLTE is part of roaming agreements. Okay, so those are important learnings. The next one learning is that it's crucial for success in BroadNet to have a really good understanding about roaming. Because PPDR operators, it's not feasible according to us that they do this negotiation themselves. So there needs to be solutions for that. So we provide, or the consortium solution provides a kind of solution with the instant roaming. Okay. Last but not least, as a learning is because one of the main objectives of interoperability is, of this phase at least, is that we show that MCS platforms of different vendors, that they can communicate with each other. That was a true challenge because the standards are just released, and they were released in Q1, which means, okay, it's very good that there are standards, but published standards, that doesn't mean that they are mature, those standards. You can only be sure that a standard is mature when you try it out, bump into issues and try to solve them, and then feed back to the standardization, of course. There were even some cases where everything was so-called standardized, but if you then compare the implementation of vendor A and vendor B, there are interpretation differences, and that's something you cannot easily reflect in a standard. So that needs to be covered one way or another as well. Also important to know is that even if standards are published, that doesn't mean that every supplier will implement everything of those standards. So that's also very important. So our recommendation is basically that there should be a list of a common set of features that you need to fulfill. And if that is the case, that you can receive the stamp that you're an MCS supplier with guaranteed interoperability. And to prove that, it's wise to define a common profile to be able to test this. So a bit similar as it used to be in the old GSM times where there was the so-called multi-vendor integration. Okay. So what's next? Already presented by Uwe and David, but so far it was mainly technical. So next is practitioner evaluation to see what they think about the solution, of course, and to see whether they believe it's useful, because if it's not useful for them, all of this was a waste of time. Okay, so for sure there will be a lot of learnings from there as well, and we need them, take them to the next level in BroadNet, of course. Thank you. Any questions?